chromosomal abnormalities account for more miscarriages than every other cause combined. Okay. So one of the first things I think we need to think about, and one of the reasons that and I'm sure most of us actually work in a very similar way, is, we ask for a good 3-month period of support minimum. And that's because spermatogenesis, the production of sperm, takes roughly 74 days to produce an entirely new batch of sex cells. And similarly, if we're thinking about, from a woman's perspective, yes, we're born with all of our eggs, but they go into this state of suspended hibernation. And the conditions that the cells are exposed to in those 3 to 4 months prior to ovulation are absolutely going to be critical to the quality of those cells. So that preconception period is going to be really, really important, just so that we can optimize that for a start.
Hi and welcome everybody to the Endo Fertility podcast, where you will be empowered to learn how to thrive and conceive with endometriosis. If you want to understand more about your endometriosis, how it can affect your fertility, and how you can personally take action to optimize your health and life, then this is the place for you. I am your host, Lizzie Alexander, founder of the Endo Fertility Specialist. As a doctor of marine ecology turned integrative nutrition health coach and holistic massage therapist, I bring a unique perspective to our discussions. Most importantly, I know what it's like to experience chronic fatigue in endo and struggle for years with primary and secondary infertility. I am now a super busy, thriving military wife, business owner and mother of an adorable little boy. Join me every Wednesday as I dive into topics that will support and guide you, from knowledge about endo and conceiving to nutrition, lifestyle and mindset, pain management to assisted fertility support, functional nutrition and testing, and much more. This podcast is designed to enhance your knowledge so you can explore the whys behind your endo and fertility struggles, whilst moving forwards towards thriving and conceiving. Please note that this is not meant to replace your current medical advice. Together, we will explore a holistic approach to healing that equips you with a toolbox full of diverse strategies to help you manage your endo and enhance your fertility journey. So sit back, relax, and enjoy listening. This episode is brought to you by my Ultimate Endo Fertility Library, available through the Endo Fertility app. This app, available on Apple and Google Play, makes it super easy to access valuable resources and courses right on your phone, even offline, making it perfect for meditations and travel. Inside the free library, you will find essential first steps to support your healing journey, including a quick start ebook, symptom tracker, delicious recipes, workbooks, guided meditations, and other helpful resources. So make sure to check out the show notes for the link to start exploring these resources today. Welcome to episode 49 of the podcast. So I'm thrilled to finally share this conversation with Alison Hall, who is a former TV producer turned registered nutritional therapist and functional medicine practitioner. So we recorded this interview over 2 years ago before my move to Oman, and I must admit, life got a bit hectic. As you know, the podcast went on hold, and this has unfortunately delayed the release, but I'm really, really excited to finally air it now. Now, Alison was an absolute joy to interview. It felt like we were old friends catching up. And I've found with some people that I interview that connection is so natural. It's not like an interview at all. It's just like a chat, like I've known that person, Alison, for a very long time. Now, her wealth of knowledge on fertility and miscarriage was truly impressive, and her personal experiences added a unique depth to her practice and her knowledge. She's someone I genuinely aspire to be like on my own journey. Now, in this episode, Alison shares her heartfelt story of her resilience and the importance of nutrition in supporting fertility. You'll hear about her journey through pregnancy, her challenges, and how she now helps couples create a personalised plan to improve their chances of a successful pregnancy. As you listen, please remember that this episode is meant to be empowering for anyone who is struggling with baby loss or fertility issues. And Alison offers a really valuable insight that can help maybe with your next steps on your journey. For some of you, it could well be triggering, and that is totally understandable. And it may not be the right time to listen. Just come back later when you're ready. So grab your favourite drink, settle in and prepare for a really enlightening conversation that may just provide the support and the understanding you need. All right, let's dive in. Alison, it is wonderful to have you on the podcast. I know you have a wealth of information on fertility and female health, particularly in relation to miscarriage, and I cannot wait for you to share this information with my listeners today. So how are you today?
Oh, thank you ever so much. I'm really pleased to be here, and I do love your podcast. So thank you very, very much for having me on. I feel quite honoured to be invited because you've had so many amazing guests. No, I'm well, thank you. Yeah, not bad at all.
Excellent. Well, we've got so much that I want to cover today, and I'm sure that we'll get through some of it. And if we don't, then let's see where we go from there. So if it's okay with you, I would love to start by you telling us a bit about your career change, because we were just chatting about it then, that you actually had a previous career as a TV producer, and how then you got into specialising in fertility as a nutritional therapist, and the reason for this special interest in miscarriage.
Right, yes. So no, I certainly was not always a nutritional therapist by any stretch of the imagination. I had quite a long career in television, and I worked as a television producer until I was in my early to mid 30s. And I loved it. I was utterly passionate about it, but it was one of those jobs where you really had to burn the candle at both ends. And that's exactly what I did. So I worked really hard. I played just as hard. And after a while, my health really, really began to take a bit of a knocking. Now, nothing really huge went on, but I was plagued with insomnia. My cycles were all over the place. I was just sort of, I found it really, really difficult to just sort of move through each day. Terrible brain fog, awful PMS, all those kind of things that we hear about. But it wasn't really until we started on our own fertility journey that I really took a huge amount of notice in nutrition. If I'm honest, I'd always loved food, and I've always been kind of vaguely interested in it, and, interested in delicious things to eat, but that was really as far as it went. And then when I encountered my own fertility struggles, I really began to stop and think about the effect that what we eat can actually have on our body's function. And so what happened with me is I actually became pregnant really quickly, and was, very exciting. It was a sort of one of these lovely sort of glowing bubbles that I felt I was in with my partner at the time. And we got all the way through to our 12-week scan, and we sat down, full of excitement. And that's when the problem started for us. So there were definite issues on that 12-week scan. So I was sent for a CVS, which is the chorionic villus sampling, where they take a sample of placental tissue, and that contains the baby's DNA for testing. And we had that, and the results were slightly ambiguous. They weren't sure how extensive the issue was. So we carried on going, and I was really clear that I didn't want to have a termination for medical reasons unless we were absolutely sure that, the issue was, warranted it. So we went for an amniocentesis at 16 weeks. Now, both the CVS and the amnio carry a risk of miscarriage. So that was sort of, by now I was sort of ricocheting between midwife appointments, doctor's appointments, high state of anxiety. And what tended to happen, or the pattern that emerged, was that, we got to the next milestone thinking, phew, we've got here, that's great. And then we had more bad news delivered. But none of it was so conclusive, you see. And so we this went on and on and on. And then eventually we went for our 21-week scan. And it was in that week that the baby died. And this was, exhausting. It shattered us both to the absolute core. And it took me a really, really long time to recover from this. And at that point, I was referred to various different doctors. I wanted to understand what had happened, number one. And the care at my local hospital was, let's just say, it was unbelievably unsympathetic. And I was in a state where I felt I had no control over anything. I felt as if it was the end of the world for me. I was convinced I was never going to be able to have any babies. And one of the hangovers of this was that I had this ongoing, really chronic, quite severe pelvic pain. So then I was referred to oncology, and I went through another carousel of hideousness. And eventually I found a brilliant doctor who specialised in pelvic pain, and he took a really integrative approach. So he was absolutely, he had one foot very firmly placed in conventional medicine, but he did look at the bigger picture. And he talked a little bit about nutrition. And then I began to read a little bit about nutrition. And the more I read, the more interested I became. And suddenly I realized that this was an area that I could begin to claw back a little bit of control over. And that was very much the beginning of my road to recovery. Now, the following year, I went on to actually have a successful pregnancy, and we had our little girl. But again, when we got to the 12-week scan, there were all sorts of problems thrown up again. And in fact, this has happened with every single one of my subsequent pregnancies. That 12-week milestone, it's just was always laden with hideousness, if you like. We went on to have a couple of further losses, and then we went on to have 2 more little girls. And I realized I had worked through most of those, or through those pregnancies and through the losses. But then by the time I had my 3rd daughter, I realized that I'd fought so hard for these girls to be here, and I wanted to be more present with them. And so I wanted to find another career that was going to actually allow me to do that. And so I decided to retrain in nutrition. And I didn't set out to work in fertility, but those were the clients that I started working with. And I had obviously a natural empathy with them, because I think as you know, if you go through this journey, I hate that word, but as you go through this, you can't help but really, really engage and connect with people who've gone through similar experiences. And I really, really wanted to stop other people going through what I'd gone through. And the more I read about it, the more sense everything made to me. And it really made sense to home in on miscarriage. So that's sort of what I've done. And I've now got to the stage where I sort of understand, I do understand what happened with us. And in fact, if I'd taken a step back and looked at our family history, I think I would have got there a lot sooner. But there was no one there actually at the time to point me in that direction. And I certainly hadn't met anybody who was going to be able to give me the sort of support that, a functional medicine trained practitioner or a nutritional therapist, for example, might be able to give their clients. So that's sort of what my story is, really.
Thank you, Alison. And that's quite a story to share. I mean, from the joys of being being a TV producer and having this kind of whirlwind life to, then going through the awful traumatic, miscarriages, and just that 12-week mark, like you said, to go through it every time, to have that sort of trauma, as it were, each time to go through it. But then to have worked through it and come through to the other side, have these 3 gorgeous daughters that you've got. And then to bring your expertise to then help so many women out there, I think is just fantastic. And that's why I really wanted to get you on here today, to be able to share that knowledge. And as you said, it is funny how you don't necessarily mean to step into the work you do. I mean, I certainly didn't, but it's what, people are attracted to you for whatever reason, whether it's the universe or sending them there because you've got this, empathy, that you have an understanding. And I think that is fantastic that you've been able to use your knowledge to now help other people. So that is, fantastic.
Thank you. I mean, I think one of the key things is, if you have walked that path, and it doesn't mean by any stretch that you can't, everyone comes to this with a natural empathy. But I do think that there is something about really understanding the high level of anxiety and stress that comes with a loss. And I think everyone, regardless of whether they've actually experienced it personally or not, comes to understand sooner or later working with clients. It is, you're never going to have a straightforward pregnancy after loss. It's not going to happen because you're bringing so much baggage with it. I've got clients and, they get their positive pregnancy test and they may have been there many times before. And actually, in many ways, it's almost although they've been desperately looking for this and they've been hoping for this moment, as soon as it comes, there's just this sheer terror that envelops them. I mean, I went through all of my pregnancies. I don't have one scan photograph of any of my children in utero because I couldn't engage with the process to that degree. I just felt it, I just couldn't go there. I mean, I'm not necessarily saying that's the right way to approach it. I don't think it is, particularly from a sort of, mental health and well-being perspective, but that was the way that I dealt with it. And I think that's the thing that everybody who, if you have experienced loss, and when we're talking about loss, let's not beat about the bush. We're talking about baby loss. We're talking about the loss of dreams, the loss of hope. And when you have experienced that, in whatever capacity that might be, everything changes. The world pivots on an entirely different axis. And you need people who are going to be able to take you by the hand and walk you through that as gently and sometimes as firmly, but really as gently as you need.
Thank you for that. And I'm lucky enough not to have gone through the loss side, although I've struggled with fertility first time, going through it again, second time now, but still, you have that, I have that, I can't imagine what it's like. I mean, I even remember when I did get pregnant, I didn't really trust it, I think until about week 20, week 22. Just because I'd seen so many close friends, I've seen family members go through the loss. It was almost like, well, I've struggled to get to this place. Is this really true? So I can't imagine. And that's why I really wanted to get someone on the podcast to talk about it. Because for me, I haven't got that personalized experience of going through it. And that's why I wanted to cover it as a subject on the podcast.
And yet in many ways, Lizzie, you have, because the journey, that fertility journey and that path to that positive pregnancy test and beyond, it's, for so many of us, it's not plain sailing. And, subfertility, I hate the word infertility. I'm not, I refuse to use that as a label, but subfertility, which so many of us do suffer and have to, we have to bear that burden, if you like, in whichever one of its myriad forms, it comes with it in many ways the same trauma, I think.
Yeah, because, particularly something we talked about recently, was it 2 episodes ago with Kat, about trauma and this emotional side. And we're not going to go so much into that today, but it's, you're absolutely right. Trauma comes in all sorts of different ways. And it's, just because you might not have lost, an early pregnancy or a later pregnancy, I suppose even cycles where you think you might be pregnant, you're still losing, like you said, you're losing that hope, and it's that every cycle. And it might be that you might have been, and particularly with endometriosis, sometimes you can get pregnant, but you may not know it. And it's very common to lose a baby within the first 5 or 6 weeks. And you may not even know that you're pregnant, or you might think you are. And then sort of your period arrives 2 or 3 days late. So it's still going through that roller coaster of hope and then dash and loss. Absolutely.
And also during that time, you're putting your life on hold. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Whether you like it or not, that becomes part and parcel of the experience. And so you're dealing with that side of things as well, where everyone else is just sort of seems to be, sailing on merrily through whatever they're going through. And you feel as though you are stuck at this sort of standstill and paralyzed in many ways, and you can't move forward, you can't move sideways, you can't move, you can't do anything. So I think you're absolutely right about that. And I think we forget how common these issues are. I mean, if we think about it, 1 in 5 pregnancies ends in loss, which rises to 1 in 8 when for those who actually report their loss. And about 85% of those losses occur in that first 12 weeks of pregnancy. So this is huge. It's not something, we think about, endometriosis, 1 in 10 women suffering with endometriosis. We're talking about such a vast percentage of the population here who go through this, and yet it's still a subject, both of these areas, are subjects that are just not really spoken about openly enough.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And it's interesting having seen both clients, but also friends and family go through it in different ways. Some talk about it, some don't want to talk about it. And it is interesting, interesting is the wrong word, actually. Disappointing at how taboo a subject it can be to talk about, and people just shut down and don't want to offer that support. Yeah.
And I think very often it's because it's shrouded in almost secrecy, or certainly in silence. People don't know what the correct response is. Very often, I think we're all familiar with those well-meaning friends, and my clients talk about it all the time, particularly when suddenly there's a rash of baby showers, for example, or whatever, and they're trying to get on with, putting one step in front of the other, as it were. And, you do have these well-meaning friends or family who think they're doing the right thing. They think they're asking the right questions, but actually it's deeply, deeply hurtful and painful every single time, because then you have to explain yourself, or you choose not to explain yourself. And of course, we tend to operate in peer groups, don't we? So very often we are surrounded by people who are going through fertility or through pregnancy at the same time that we want to be.
So I'm going to pick up on something you've just said there, actually. Maybe going off on a tangent here, but you said there about well-meaning friends and family asking questions that then are often the wrong questions. What I would really like, actually, I think it would be a really good thing, is maybe if you could suggest a couple of questions that would be the right type of questions, or examples of the wrong type of questions. So people listening to this, either because they're going through it, or because they're listening to it and their friends and family might be going through things and they're wanting to pick up some helpful tips. It might be quite useful. I don't want to focus on it too much, because I do want to move on to the nutrition piece, but maybe just mention a couple of things.
Well, I think one of the big ones, when people have experienced loss, is when you get the whole, oh, well, at least you can get pregnant sort of thing, rather than, actually you just want to sit with that person and say, how are you? Checking in with that person, making sure they're all right. It's not about, well, at least is never going to be a good way to start.
No.
It's never a good conversation opener for a start.
Oh God, well, at least, yeah.
So, and I think, it was an early loss. That's okay. You'll get over that. Oh, it's so common. 1 in 4, 1 in 5, spouting statistics. It happens all the time. Don't worry, and it's the sort of picking yourself, expecting you to pick yourself up and just sort of, move on. I think
diminishing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, instead, well, for those people who can, I think it's just checking in with someone. How are you doing? Do you want to come out for a walk, or are you getting enough sleep? Do you need any help with anything? The practical things.
Yeah.
That's what we want. And also to remember this loss as well. Yeah. And I think that's the other part of it, because people forget really quickly, and understandably so, because they've got their own lives to get on with. But when you do have, for example, a baby shower announcement or a pregnancy announcement, announcing it by text, a gentle text to someone, so that the recipient has an opportunity to take a step back, compose themselves. Of course, they're going to be really thrilled for that dear friend of theirs, but there is probably going to be an element of disappointment, of anger, maybe of frustration, and that's only natural. And I think we need to normalize some of those feelings that might feel a little bit ugly, but that's part of the human experience. So I think actually giving people the space to feel what they need to feel, to allow themselves to grieve, is so very important. And also then not to forget. And I think this is the case. There tends to be a hierarchy or supposed hierarchy of grief, doesn't there? So, I hear all the time people saying that, a late loss is, you're going to feel it more than an early loss. Well, not necessarily, because you don't know what that person has been through before. You don't know how hard that person has had to work to get to where they are. And so it's making these judgments all the time, I think is really damaging.
Thank you. And I think that's really, really helpful on a couple of points there, on the fact that you don't know what someone's gone through. And, it was one of the things I was going to ask, because, there's all this different terminology when you go to the hospital and the doctors between the types of losses as well. And it's very sort of medical, isn't it? Like you said, whether an early loss or a late loss, and there's this assumption that there is a difference in how you're going to feel. But also what you said there about giving space. I like the fact you get, the tip about maybe texting someone if, you've got pregnant and a friend's going through this, because it just suddenly made me recall a dear friend of mine whose life hasn't gone the way that they wanted to. They want a family, all the rest of it. And then a best friend of theirs who they hadn't seen in ages had just rocked up 9 months pregnant, didn't give any warning, no warning, turned around. It was like this bump was there. And it was just like, whoa, didn't know you were with someone, didn't know you were pregnant. And you're like, could have given me a bit of warning.
Yeah.
And I just thought, and it's that space to, they knew that person was going through stuff. And it was just like, actually, that was quite self-absorbed, that sometimes it's that giving space to allow someone to process some emotions in their own, in their own space and then they can then either put on a brave face to be happy for that person, so I like the fact you said about the space, about giving someone maybe a text message to give them a bit of forewarning kind of thing.
And it's never okay to say, when are you going to start trying for a baby?
Oh God,
that is never okay. That is no one's business apart from that couple's business. I don't care how close a friend you are or how close a family member, just don't go there. That is on the barred list,
I know. I've got one that's just quite, you always have to laugh. I can laugh at it because but my husband, he's just started a language training course because we're moving to Oman, and he was in the call and they were all introducing themselves, and they were like, about your family, because it's very family orientated. I've got a son, 3.5. Oh, when are you trying for the next one? Isn't it about time you had a next one? I was just he told me about this later, and we had to chuckle about it because it was like, if only they knew. If a child has got like a 3 or 4 year gap, do you not think that maybe that's a question you don't ask?
Absolutely. It's extraordinary.
It is. I just the insensitivity of it.
Come up with this exactly.
Anyway, you've got to laugh for some of these things, haven't you? Because if you don't laugh, you cry.
Sometimes you do, and you can cry, and there's nothing wrong. That's what I mentioned, those ugly feelings. We have ugly feelings. We are human. We're allowed to have them, and my goodness, we've got to have those moments where we're allowed to just sort of shout them from the rooftops if you want. And that's where the supportive friends come in as well. That they can sit back and just give you a hug, for example. It doesn't necessarily need words.
Yeah, I completely agree. So there are lots of things I want to cover today, and we've already covered quite a big side of it on the emotional side, actually. And there's so much more we can delve into that side. But I also want to make sure that we cover the area of your expertise too, which is, nutrition, lifestyle, the functional testing kind of side of things.
Yeah.
Before we kind of dive into that, I'd love to know, do you work with many women that have got endometriosis, adenomyosis, that kind of area, or it'd just be interesting to know? You do?
Yes, I do. I would say I tend to take on between 10 and 12 couples at any one time. Because that's sort of that I found that's the sweet spot for me. And I tend to work with them for a 3-month period. And sometimes we'll go on for longer, but we have always an initial 3-month period. And of those sort of 10 to 12, I would say generally about a third of them, between a quarter and a third of them, have been given an endometriosis diagnosis, either the one that they've had for a long time or one that has just emerge with medical investigation. Yeah. So it's something we see a lot of, I'd say, in clinic.
Yeah, and that says in itself, do you know what I mean, how prevalent it is, if a third of the people that you're seeing have got endometriosis and adenomyosis. That's just really useful for listeners, that they know that you're very much used to working with this, with clients with endometriosis.
But I think what's really important to bear in mind is that there's never, be it either unexplained infertility, which for me is another one of these really awful rubbish terms, because I don't believe in unexplained infertility. It means either we haven't dug hard enough, or we haven't dug hard enough, we haven't looked hard enough, is really my thoughts about that. And 25% of couples receive this diagnosis. But if the conventional lab tests are coming back as normal, then we need to look elsewhere. But frequently, there is not just one thing going on anyway. And I think that is I think that's a mistake that a lot of people make. They come across something, and I see, and I'm sure you feel this as well. I regard my job as being one where I'm there to help, to guide a couple or a single person, or I'm actually there, but I'm also there to reduce their risk factors.
Yes.
None of us, hand on heart, can ethically say we can, work with me and I guarantee you're going to have a successful pregnancy. Of course, we can't do that. And it would be, anyone who does, you need to run the other way as fast as you possibly can. But what we can do is we can assess that individual or that couple, and we can look to see what those risk factors are. And endometriosis is going to be a big one if that's part of your health picture. But we must remember that there's other stuff going on as well. Totally. And also, endo is such a complex condition, isn't it? It's got so many different drivers that, there's never going to be the same support or the same protocols that we put in place for each and every one of those endo sufferers.
Yeah, completely. If it was a cutty cooker, is that the expression? Cookie cutter. I can't say it. Cutty cooker, protocol, just because you've got endometriosis, but it's not. Like you said, every client is completely different, and different things come up, and it is a very complex disease. And like you said, and I think sometimes also you think that maybe that's the biggest issue, but quite often it's not. There's other things that are actually more my goodness, there, and it's like it's almost like it's put a blame on it, and it's like actually you've got some other things going on that are interrelated but are actually bigger factors that are affecting your fertility more.
And this is what I see time and time again. I'll meet couples or individuals, and very often they've been, most of them have been on this merry-go-round for one hell of a long time, and then they come to me and they're regarded very often as those complex cases who no one else, no one's been able to find an answer. And there will inevitably be more than just one driver going on. Yes, we'll be looking at the endometriosis, but we'll be looking at, I don't know, thyroid. We'll be looking at vaginal health. We'll be looking at maternal depletion. We'll be looking at, male factor, whatever it might be. But there are always going to be multiple things to address and support.
No, exactly. Thank you for that. It was very, very good answer. I think one of the things I'd like to move on to now is what are some of the key reasons couples can end up having a miscarriage? As there are so many reasons. This is going to be a huge topic. And like I've mentioned already, obviously with endometriosis, a lot of women can end up having an early miscarriages in that first 5 or 6 weeks, a lot to do with inflammation, a lot of other reasons, it can be that implantation hasn't occurred, etc., but it'd be really good to talk around some of the reasons why the miscarriage can happen.
Absolutely. Okay, so what we know is that chromosomal abnormalities account for more miscarriages than every other cause combined. Okay, so one of the first things I think we need to think about, and one of the reasons that and I'm sure most of us actually work in a very similar way, is, we ask for a good 3-month period of support minimum. And that's because spermatogenesis, the production of sperm, takes roughly 74 days to produce an entirely new batch of sex cells. And similarly, if we're thinking about, from a woman's perspective, yes, we're born with all of our eggs, but they go into this state of suspended hibernation, and the conditions that the cells are exposed to in those 3 to 4 months prior to ovulation are absolutely going to be critical to the quality of those cells. So that preconception period is going to be really, really important, just so that we can optimize. And we want to be looking at hormonal issues. So we want to be looking at endo, at PCOS, at progesterone and luteal phase defects. We want to be considering thyroid function, which is so important. If we think about it, we've got thyroid receptors on virtually every single cell in our body. And we know that a fetal thyroid gland isn't going to be mature enough to take over until roughly 16 weeks in utero. So up until then, the maternal thyroid gland and the thyroid production has to be able to support both mother and baby. So, that's an area that people frequently sort of trip up on. And I very, very often see both endometriosis and low functioning, generally thyroid coexisting in my clients. And I'm sure you do too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to
really big one. Go on.
I was going to go. I was going to go down a road there with regards to still the lack of understanding around the thyroid with the medical profession, and not understanding that even with a basic marker of a TSH, which is high, and when I've sent them back there and said, look, we've been working on this, but she needs some additional help here. This is not, something's not right. There's an age factor in here, this, that, and the other. And they've just gone, no, there's not an issue. And it's just like, but anyway, that's something else that I could get really. Yeah.
It's amazing, isn't it? I mean, I always try, and I think one of the things that we need to be able to do is, it's really important, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, that we're working alongside the medical.
Yes, totally.
Community. And, I regard my role as being complementary. So, I will work alongside, and I actually encourage my clients to allow me to work alongside their GP, their consultant, to communicate with them, and then to refer on in cases where we need to. If, for example, we have identified something in blood labs which suggests that, more work is needed, more support is needed, maybe medication is needed. And I think it's actually a little bit of a fallacy, isn't it? Or it's so misguided that people assume that we're going to be totally anti all medicine, which is absolutely not the case. It's really important. And particularly when clients are going through fertility struggles, there is a little bit of a clock ticking. And much as we might like to support a thyroid production or low functioning thyroid, through purely nutrition and lifestyle interventions, which can be incredibly effective, sometimes we don't have the time to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
The number of times I've had to literally, hot foot a client down to their doctor to get some levothyroxine because maybe, they've got an upcoming IVF cycle, and we need to normalize things as quickly as we possibly can. We have to do that. That's part of it, really, isn't it? So I've lost my thread there.
It's all right. I threw you off there by going down the thyroid, but I'm not gonna. I'll push you back on again. But we were talking about reason.
So thyroid is a big one. I think blood sugar balance, things like diabetes, is thrown up. And thinking of other hormonal issues, first of all. So high prolactin, which tends to be driven by stress, and unless it's really, really, really high. Adrenal issues, DHEA fluctuations, cortisol, so our key kind of chronic stress hormone, all of those are at play. The thing that I'm seeing more and more frequently in clinic is work needed in the vaginal health area.
Yeah.
We know that roughly 30% of women who are infertile have pathogenic bacteria in their vaginal tract, regardless of whether they're symptomatic or not. And infection is implicated in up to, I think it's about 66% of late miscarriages. So there's an awful lot. That's a big area for me. And in fact, there was a study that came out by Tommy's, the very, very brilliant miscarriage charity back in February of this year. And that was looking at the higher prevalence of miscarriage related to an imbalance in the vaginal microbiome communities as compared with a miscarriage which was associated with chromosomal abnormalities.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah. So that really is.
What was the outcome of that? What did they find?
Well, what they found was that there was a higher prevalence with a vaginal disbalance.
Okay. So there's a higher prevalence, and they thought, okay, interesting.
Yes, exactly.
Interesting.
And it is particularly in recurrent loss. And this is what the thing I see time and time again. Maternal depletion is another big one. And by that, it might be a case of secondary infertility where we are just exhausted and we're run ragged and our body doesn't have those natural raw materials that it needs to support pregnancy. For example, we know that low folate is associated with a 47% increased risk of miscarriage. We know that low B12 in one study was associated with a 34% increased risk of miscarriage. And vitamin D deficiency is associated again with miscarriage and recurrent loss because of the way that it helps to support immune function. It's really important in metabolic issues, for example, insulin resistance, gestational diabetes, and also for fetal development. So, we need vitamin D for calcium absorption, for example, and to help prepare that endometrium. And it also helps to support cell division, for example. So, if you've got low vitamin D status, which is such a simple thing to correct once you know about it, then you're really reducing your risk factors, almost overnight.
Yeah.
So that's another big one. In terms of, so what we're looking at there is sort of nutrient depletion, which might also be implicated in gut issues. So if you've got lots of issues and you're not able to support, your digestion isn't working optimally, then if you're not able to digest your food properly, for whatever reason, maybe you've got sort of, significant chronic, bloating, flatulence, indigestion, constipation, or inconsistent bowel movements, then that is going to impact the way our body is able to actually extract those really important nutrients to allow every single cell in the body to do the job that it needs to do as optimally as it needs to. So that's another side of nutrient issues that I think we need to bear in mind. And I don't think I've ever seen a client in clinic who does not have at least one area, one nutrient that needs a little bit of support. It doesn't happen. Our soils are far more depleted than they used to be. There's, there's all this intensive farming going on. Obviously, everyone has diets, or so many people are living on a diet of far more processed foods. So our diets are not as nutrient dense as we need them to be. So that's another area. Male factor is huge. 30% of fertility problems are due to male factor. 30% roughly are due to a woman alone. And then roughly 30 to 40% are due to both male and female or unknown factors. So that's quite a large proportion. And we know that male fertility has taken an absolute nosedive in the last 50 years. So that's a big one that we need to consider as well. So those tend to be the areas that crop up time and time and time again, I would say.
Thank you. And that's really helpful. Which are the most common areas that require attention? You've kind of covered them. I think the nutrient deficiencies.
Well, I think particularly in my clients with endometriosis, vaginal health is huge.
Yeah. And it's something I test. I now test all clients. I'm making it a compulsory thing. If you want to work with me now, I didn't used to, but I am now. And it is interesting, those clients, even that have got no symptoms, they're coming back with things that, and it's like, that's very, very interesting. And I think, the research is showing us so much that you can do, there's a lot you can do from it. So yeah, it is a really fascinating area.
Oh, it is absolutely fascinating. And the research is just exploding at the moment. I mean, it is incredible, actually. And I would say that's one of the things that is the biggest game changer in my clinic. And particularly when we're looking at endometriosis, because we know that there is a state of sort of heightened immune activity, and we have to think, what comes with that.
Yeah.
So again, you're just looking beyond that first diagnosis, if you want to see, what are the ripple effects going to be of that further down the line. And that's very much that sort of integrative functional medicine approach that we tend to take. And I guess that, for me, that's one of the ways that we diverge perhaps from conventional healthcare, that we have the opportunity to actually sit back and really, really take that incredibly detailed history so that we can really understand those individual risk factors of each and every person who we're working with.
Yeah, and I think that's a privilege, actually. And it's a privilege. I've got friends who are doctors, and I know that they're often frustrated because they just don't get that time. They don't get the time, to sit down. When I get a client to fill in like a 6 to 10 page health history questionnaire that might take them 1 to 2 hours to fill in, and then you spend an hour and a half looking at it and then an hour and a half talking through it. I mean, a doctor would never get that time to be a detective. Do you know what I mean? Which I'm sure that they would love to. And I feel quite privileged that you get to delve that deep into someone's life. And often I've had clients go, nobody knows as much information as you do now, and it's a huge amount of information to kind of go in and find out what's going on and what's related to this, what's related to that, and
it's a complex web, isn't it? I remember I've seen I remember looking at a research paper a while ago, and there was a really beautiful image, and you just saw literally web upon web upon web on this page in this little diagram, looking at all the different areas and how they were interrelated. And it is, we need to just bear in mind, it's almost like a row of dominoes, isn't it?
Yes.
And if you've got one thing going on, then the chances are there's all sorts of other stuff behind it. And the more that we can do to support those areas, to reduce those risk factors, then the better position that client is going to be in.
Yes. Yeah, completely. And that kind of leads me on to this topic of where nutritional lifestyle factors can reduce these chances of miscarriage, which you've touched on some of them already with the B12, vitamin D, folate. They are some like classic, actions that we can take to check them to, make sure that they're optimal levels to reduce those risk factors. What other things do you do in clinic in terms of nutrition and lifestyle factors to help reduce these chances?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, obviously it depends on the individual, because we're all these lovely, unique snowflakes. And it is about managing those individual risk factors. I mean, first of all, my first port of call, I'm always going to ask my clients to go and see their GP and ask for any routine investigations that can be done. So, so that we've got that boxed off as well. But then, it's looking at a really nutrient dense diet. And really encouraging and finding ways just to, amp that up for each and every person. So, that might be, if we're thinking about the Mediterranean diet, which is always bandied around, or an anti-inflammatory diet we hear time and time again. But, if we think about what that actually means, we're looking at that plant-based diet with lots and lots of color and fiber. So the colors are going to give us a variety of phytochemicals. They're going to give us the vitamins, the minerals, the antioxidants to support the functioning of each cell and protect each cell from damage. And then, those plants are also going to give us the fiber to keep our gut happy and to eliminate hormones, so important in endo, for example. I'm always telling my clients to eat, to let's really try and go for half a plate of veg.
Yeah.
Look at those beneficial fats, look at the olive oil, the nuts, the seeds. Broccoli is my answer for everything.
Yeah,
quite
broccoli.
Frankly. It's just broccoli, basically. What we know about broccoli is it's a member of the cruciferous family, and it contains this really potent compound called indole 3-carbinol, and that helps our liver to eliminate and detoxify used hormones, among other things, and toxins. So, the more that we can keep things moving so that we don't get these sort of, clogs in the drain pipe, as it were, that can only really, really help. So I think, there are those sort of things, and with different people, you need to take it to different levels. And I always say, it gets a bit tired now because I say it to nearly every single one of my prospective clients when I first meet them. I'm going to meet them wherever they're at. So if I meet a couple, and this has never happened yet, I should add, but if I met a couple who ate in McDonald's morning, noon and night, we would start working in McDonald's because actually there's no point me creating some sort of, fancy food plan and talking it through with someone if as soon as they get off the call with me, their heart sinks and they feel totally defeated and deflated because they just think, I can't possibly commit to any of those things. Yeah. So everything's got to be manageable, and it's got to be in those baby steps. Yeah. But also getting enough sleep. Yeah. Really important. I mean, it's one that, that's just sort of, it's so essential. And looking at that work-life balance, we know that stress is a huge, huge driver here. And we also know that what's going to work for one person isn't necessarily going to work for another. But, really trying to find those micro moments where we can maybe just take a step back or take a breath. And if we can do some little things just to scaffold our day, even if they give us, as I say, these micro moments, all of those things are going to help, sort of you're going to add to that bucket of that's sort of, supporting you, rather than, people use the analogy, don't they, of a bank account or a bank balance. Yeah. We want to keep putting a little bit more in all the time rather than constantly taking out. It's very often those sort of foundational things, but you've just got to work out what's going to be the driver for that individual person, what's going to be the thing that makes it easier for that person to eat such and such, or to have their 8 glasses of water a day. And then look to see what what a person's individual makeup is like. And when we're talking about broccoli, again, it comes back to broccoli. Broccoli. Yeah, I'm being flippant, obviously, but
obviously, yes, yeah. Maybe if you're in your 40s, yeah. I mean, I would say sometimes there are some cases where I kind of like maybe don't have broccoli in every meal of the day. No, I mean, if you're in your 40s and you haven't got as much estrogen, that's the kind of that would be one of those cases where it's like maybe don't have broccoli every day. But I think that's one of that. But because I think sometimes people do literally go right, broccoli.
Oh no, we don't want to take it to an extreme. And it's all about diversity.
Exactly.
It's about diversity. And actually, if you just had a plate full of broccoli, that's not going to do you any favors. We want to get as many different plant-based foods in that diet as we possibly can. And that way, they're going to give us the widest variety of vitamins, of minerals, of antioxidants. And also then they're going to support our gut bacteria. And we know that our gut bacteria are just as diverse as you and I are, and they all have different tastes and preferences. So again, the broader that variety of plant-based foods that we can manage to encompass, the better position we're going to be in.
Yes, I think that was a really good point about that diversity. Really like that. So do you use functional testing to help, well, you do because you've already said it, but to help understand why someone's had a recurrent miscarriage, for example? I mean, what functional testing? Do you use genetic testing? What kind of thing would you do?
Okay. Yes, I do. Absolutely. It's a really integral part of my work. The sort of tests I'll use is we touched briefly upon the vaginal microbiome. Yeah. So, that's always in there and that's a no-brainer. I'm always going to look at thyroid health. I want to see if there's an autoimmune component to any low functioning thyroid, for example. I'm going to look at stool testing because I want to rule out any pathogens in the gut. I want to optimize our ability to absorb nutrients. Genetic testing that you mentioned there is a huge one. And it's one of these areas that I will particularly be keen to use some genetic testing if we have got a case of recurrent loss, because we know that, I want to be looking, for example, at methylation. And what we're looking at here is, if we think about methylation in its broadest possible term, it's the way that we are using, or the way I like to describe it, and I kind of do this in sort of quite basic language because it's such a complicated area, I think. But it's the way that we are utilizing particular nutrients to allow our cells to function, to create energy. Methylation is absolutely vital for DNA synthesis and repair. So if we're thinking about fertility, we need to make sure that the DNA is being created in the way that we want it to be created. We know that there are links between miscarriage and methylation. And what we're really looking at when we're thinking about genes is the setup of our genes. So we're born with our genes, but they're not necessarily going to be switched on or off. And they are going to be influenced by the conditions around them. So if we're thinking again about methylation, we're thinking about issues with what we understand is, the folate cycle. So the way we're utilizing folate, and the necessary nutrients required for that cycle. And very often it goes way beyond folic acid, which is the thing that people always sort of touch upon. So folic acid is our synthetic form of folate. A lot of the population aren't actually able to make that conversion from folic acid to folate particularly efficiently. And if I know that that's an issue, then we can ensure that we're getting the folate in the right form for that person. So it's all about individualized, tailored nutritional support. And folate, of course, we can get from dark leafy green veg. But if there is a blockage somewhere in that methylation cycle, you might have extra need for that folate. And so then again, we can tailor the supplements that you're getting, the food that you're putting into your diet. But we also know that it's, as I said, it goes beyond just folate and folic acid. There was a study in 2019 that showed that we need higher levels of B6, of B12, of choline and methionine. Again, to support that, not only to support that methylation cycle, but in this particular study, they showed that if we have those higher levels of those nutrients, that could halve the risk of neural tube defects.
That's big.
So, for those people who are being prescribed just folic acid on its own, that's not going to cut it.
No.
It's just not going to cut it. And we also know that methylation is associated and related to cardiovascular disease. So again, if we know that there's cardiovascular disease or a strong history of cardiovascular disease in someone's family, then again, that's an area that we're going to, really, really hone in on, I think. So that's a big one for me. And similarly for endometriosis, I often see methylation issues there, but also the way our genes are set up to actually handle and manage and eliminate our estrogen. We know that there are family risks and with endometriosis, we know that it tends to have this sort of genetic pattern to it. So again, if we take that step back and we look at other female members of that family, that's going to give us further clues. So yeah, genetic testing is big, I would say, but it is all about whether the genes are actually expressed, because the genetic panel is going to show us what our predisposition is, but it's not necessarily showing us what's happening on the ground in any given moment. So using methylation alongside, if we're talking about endometriosis, maybe a Dutch test. So I can see how the body is handling its sex hormones and its stress hormones is going to be far more potent and give me far more information than just a genetic test on its own.
Yeah, no, I would completely agree. Thank you. That's a whole wealth of information. And I think it's brilliant. No, it's brilliant because it's what I wanted you to share. And we could talk for hours on this. I know that we could. Hopefully we're not, overwhelming you whilst you're listening to this episode. What I'd like to ask now is I'd love to hear an inspirational story of when you've worked with a couple that has unfortunately had recurrent miscarriages and you've then helped them go on and have a baby, because I think it always really helps when you hear these inspirational stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Most of my clients come to me with an experience and a history of loss. I'm I tell you what, thinking about some of the areas we've already touched upon, I can think of one couple who had come to me having experienced 3 losses already. They were being referred on for further investigations, finally, to their conventional healthcare provider. So we knew that was happening in parallel. And I worked with both couples. We had low morphology, so on the male side. So they had this particular male had a lot of abnormally shaped sperm, and we know that sperm respond brilliantly to nutrition and lifestyle changes. And again, because I mentioned earlier that spermatogenesis takes roughly 74 days, so an entirely new batch of sperm are going to be produced every 74 days, which means that what we're doing now is going to directly impact the quality of those sperm a couple of months down the line. So we were able to really, really set to work on him to try and improve that semen quality. And we did that. We also found that the woman in the couple, she had very, very low vitamin D status. So that was a real issue. She did have a history of endometriosis. And we did a vaginal swab. And when we did the vaginal swab, we found that she didn't have any of the beneficial bacteria that we want to see there. And we know that there are certain bacteria that are incredibly supportive from a fertility perspective. And if we don't have them there, that is going to cause problems from a fertility point of view. But it also it means that there is far more room, if you like, in that female reproductive tract for less beneficial bacteria to become dominant. And that's exactly what had happened here. And so this particular person had no lactobacillus species. They had very, very high levels of something called Prevotella, which we see is a very inflammatory bacteria. And I see that one come up quite a lot, actually, in my endo girls.
Yes, I've seen that as well.
Do you see that? Yeah.
Yes.
So that was in really, really high levels. They also had high levels of something called Enterococcus faecalis and E. coli. And both of those bacteria are also associated with UTI infections. And so we worked for a good couple of months on these areas where we tried to, optimize the female reproductive tract. We got strain-specific probiotics in there. We used some antimicrobial agents, again, just to try and bring some of these, more pathogenic influences under control. And they had a baby 6 weeks ago.
Oh, amazing.
Which was lovely. And that was after 4 years of subfertility and fertility struggles. And of course, no one had an opportunity to look at this before. So that was a really, really lovely, that was an incredibly heartwarming
fantastic
case, actually. And the problem here was that conventional medicine did not have the toolkit available to consider these areas.
Yes. Yeah.
So yes, the woman knew that she had low vitamin D status and was told to take, I think, 400 IU
of vitamin D,
which was not going to touch the sides.
No.
But again, that's the government guidelines, and that's what this particular GP felt was going to be the right thing for them. So again, we can do, some nice calculations. We can consider body weight. We can consider what, if you're having any intake of vitamin D at the moment, and then we can get a nice little, use an algorithm and create a perfectly tailored prescription for that person. So there's all sorts of things that we actually have in our toolkit that, the NHS just doesn't have available. Or otherwise, even if you have a GP who is like an open-minded, they might have a practice manager who's holding the purse strings, who's breathing down their necks, who's not giving them that freedom to do what they want to do. So, and that's, I think, one of the problems we have when we refer our clients back to GPs for conventional routine testing. And very often their hands are tied.
Totally, with nice guidelines. And exactly.
And I think we need to bear that in mind and actually be appreciative of what the GPs are able to do and understand that actually we can be there in a supportive capacity.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I have to say my GP is fantastic. I mean, absolutely fantastic. And sometimes it is about, if you aren't getting on with yours, then always ask for a second opinion. I think that's always
Definitely.
worth it. Mine is absolutely amazing. I literally felt like writing her a letter the other day just to go, by the way, you're amazing. Because, you just, and sometimes there are ones that I've heard through clients where it might be that, the hands are tied, exactly like you said, by nice guidelines. I think recently with COVID, with the whole vitamin D thing, I don't know whether you've noticed, but I've had people come back and say, no, they're not allowed to even test vitamin D. And I'm like, well, what are you on about? And I don't know whether it's because of COVID, everyone's being asking for vitamin D tests, and that's changed, because that's rather an odd one. They're like, no, unless you've got rickets or bone health issues, you're not allowed to test for vitamin D. And I'm like, what? That's a bit strange.
Yeah. No, I'm seeing this time and time again now. And actually, a vitamin D test is very inexpensive.
Exactly. Yeah, you can go and do it privately.
Exactly. And we're talking, in terms of inexpensive, we're talking under £40.
Yeah.
So it really, really doesn't cost very much. And it's easy to do a finger prick test to get a really, and you're getting a really, really good idea of what's going on. So it's always worth cutting to the chase if necessary on that one. I think it's a question of picking your battles as well, really, isn't it?
Exactly. So we have chatted and covered so many things. It's been fantastic. I would love to ask you, are there any sort of resources or things you'd like to share with people that will help them, that you want to sort of refer them to help them, whether it's emotionally, nutritionally, sort of lifestyle, that would be a good place to point them towards? I mean, you've mentioned Tommy's.
Tommy's is brilliant.
Mentioned Tommy's already.
Charity, absolutely. They're fantastic, and they're a wealth of knowledge. And also what's brilliant about them is because they have such an active research arm, very often you can get the evidence there. You can pull something up on the Tommy's website and take that to your doctor. And that just gives you a little bit, a more robust case in terms of getting the support that you think you might need. So Tommy's is wonderful. I'm hugely in favour of counselling. I mean, I will provide emotional support, obviously, for my couples, but I do think particularly when one has experienced traumatic loss, in whatever form that might be, having some help to work through that trauma is really, really important. Something that I've started using actually is a Sensate machine. Do you have one, Lizzie? I don't know whether you use them.
No.
It's brilliant. It's a little sort of pebble-shaped device. And what you do is you rest it on your breastbone and it vibrates very gently. And you sync it up to your phone and it plays music through headphones. And the vibrations help to tone your vagus nerve.
I've heard of similar things. I have tried even a similar thing. But I've not heard this one.
So that's really nice. So I've started using that actually with clients recently, and they're really, really enjoying that. But I think searching out things like fertility yoga can be really helpful. I think when we're talking about endometriosis, visceral osteopathy and womb massage can be fantastically helpful and supportive as well. So I've got quite a nice network of practitioners who I will refer to people onto if they would like that extra step of the way. That's
brilliant.
Those are sort of things
Lots of things there. Thank you. Lots of things for people to walk away with. So do you have anything you're working on at the moment that you want to share with listeners, or tell us how people can find and connect with you?
So my work is predominantly one-to-one at the moment. I am on Instagram at Alison Hall _fertility, and also my website, which is alisonhallnutrition.co.uk. I had to think about that for a minute. So you can find me on either of those places. Instagram is probably the best, although I'm not hugely active. I'm sort of on there, and I'm in my DMs frequently. So that's probably the best place to get a hold of me, really. And yes, I'm, as I said, I work with singles, I work with couples, donor, any form of fertility. And while I do absolutely specialise in loss. I sort of cover the whole range there. Yes.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you ever so much. And finally, question I always ask is, if women who are listening today could take one thing away, what would that be?
Oh, gosh, what would it be? I think I think there are two things that I'd say are absolutely essential, or that can really, really help. That rainbow of vegetables. So you're getting, so from a nutrition perspective, you're getting the vitamins, the minerals, the antioxidants, the fiber that we've already talked about. But I also think just getting outside every single day can be such a game changer. It's so important. It helps to reset and support our circadian rhythm. It gives us a nice release of endorphins. And if we're going out between 11 and 3, then we're going to be topping up on our vitamin D, which can only be a good thing, or certainly between March and September in the UK. So I would say getting outside every single day. And if that becomes one of your micro moments of peace and calm, then that can only be a good thing.
Thank you, Alison. I think that's a brilliant answer to take away with. And thank you for coming.
Things.
Exactly.
The simple things, they're actually always the best.
Yes. And often we forget about the simple things. Like for me, the simple things are like sleep and breathing. I'm into breathing at the moment. I'm into, all about breath work. So it is often the simple free things that don't forget those.
Yeah, I think it's very easy for us to get caught up in this very, very complex web, and the fertility world is such a noisy place, isn't it? That you can become blindsided by it. And sometimes getting back to basics, while it might not be the ultimate answer, it's definitely going to help you on that path.
No, exactly. Brilliant. Thank you, Alison, so much for coming on today. It's been a fantastic conversation. We've covered so much from, emotional side of things through to nutrition, functional testing, and you have enlightened myself, and I know you will have enlightened our listeners today. So appreciate you coming on today and taking the time.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been really lovely to chat to you.
Brilliant. I will put all your details on the show notes so people can find you, and I hope to catch you very soon.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode and found some useful tips and actions you can take away and put into practice. If you loved listening, be sure to subscribe so you'd never miss an episode. It would be amazing if you could take a minute to leave an Apple or Spotify review. Your feedback helps us reach more women who might benefit and keeps the podcast going strong, and it only takes a second. If you know someone who would love to listen to this episode, please share it with them. So this season, I'm introducing the podcast goodie bag, where you will get access to a range of fantastic freebies contributed from our guests. To do this, you just have to sign up to the Fertility mailing list, which is where you'll be the first to hear my inner thoughts, tried experiences, and the latest products and service launches. The link to the podcast goodie bag sign-up page is in the show notes below. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you next week for another episode.